I am Marcia Balisciano, and I have all my bases covered because, as I've mentioned to Carrie, I am an Italian citizen. I am a British subject, and you can hear by my accent that I am American by birth. And I just wanted to ask if there's any fellow Americans in the room. So let me wish you a happy Thanksgiving. Yes, I'll be making a swift exit after, so I can do something with turkey. So I put who is RELX, but actually that is always a thing because I think it should be what is RELX, because RELX is not a person. RELX is made up of 36,500 people, roughly. And I think I have a colleague in the audience, David Dedman. David?
Just went out.
He just went out. Okay. We're really doing well. Actually, I just checked our, oh, hi. How are you? Nice to see you. All in the family. So I was just explaining who we are. So RELX is a large business that you may never have heard of. So as I have mentioned before, we went from a company that not many people had ever heard of when we were called Reed Elsevier to when we changed our corporate name in 2015, a company that no one had ever heard of. But actually, this stat here is, in terms of our market cap, is actually not quite accurate, a little bit higher than that today. And we're actually fifth in the FTSE in terms of market cap, so a very large business. And we operate in about 180 countries around the world. We start with what we call our unique contributions to society. And I guess I should be saying that when Carrie and I had a chat about what I could speak to you about today, it's a little bit about where are we going with corporate responsibility. And we could talk about the terminology that we use as well, because I think that's quite interesting. But where we start at RELX is around what we call our unique contributions to society. What is it about us that's different from other businesses? So you can see that we have 4 different companies that underpin the parent, which is RELX. So we're about risk and protection of society, and we do that through products that will, for example, decision trusts that will help to detect fraud in transactions. But what's also very good, financial inclusion, is that if you are in an evolving economy and you don't presently have access to credit, you may not you may find it difficult because you don't have those traditional credit sources. So what this tool does is look at alternatives for that so that we can get more people access to credit. Science, technology, medical at Elsevier. So we're focused on advancing science and improving health outcomes. At LexisNexis Legal and Professional, we very much focus on advancing the rule of law, what we think is the foundation for what we need to build our businesses. So we're cataloging the world's laws and making them available to professionals who need those laws. And as a really good example of our unique contributions, putting them to work, in just a few weeks, we're going to have the representatives of the government of Ethiopia at our head office, because my colleagues have been working for over 5 years on trying to digitize the tax law of Ethiopia. A lot of political instability over that period, trying to get access, trying to get everybody on board, working with partners, working with our local office in South Africa. But we're finally there. And on the same day, in Addis, there will be the launch of these tax laws. They're digitized. It's important that citizens know what these laws are, but also government as well. At RX, that's our events business, and we have over 400 shows that cycle in and out over a 2-year period. Here in the United Kingdom, that'll be things like World Travel Market, which took place this month, or London Book Fair, Comic-Con. It's endlessly fascinating, the number of shows bringing people together to foster market. And across RELX, we focus on access to information because that is a binding thread between these businesses. So I don't know if you can read I decided to have some fancy writing today. And that's circa 2000. So, where have we been and where are we going in terms of corporate responsibility? So let's talk about nomenclature for a minute, because when I started, so I'm a good kind of test bunny for this, because no one had my job before me. So when I started at RELX, which was around 2004, my title was Corporate Social Responsibility, CSR. And I originally started out with a very discrete piece of work. In fact, the CEO told me that my job was going to be 2 years. That's what he thought. But I was seeing a lot of questions being asked of RELX that we didn't know the answer to. And I said, I think this is all of the same thing. How much responsible paper do we buy, and how do we define responsible paper? For example, how are we avoiding child labor in our supply chain? How are we holding our suppliers to our account, the same standards that we set for ourselves? So I think my headline there is around 2000 to, a nice to do, a little bit niche. By 2010, things are moving more toward the mainstream, and I'm sure you recall this in terms of your careers. 2010, Deepwater Horizon of BP. I looked today to see, what was happening, remind myself. So big focus on, environment, and also Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Carbon Disclosure Project, now known by its acronym CDP. They'd been around for a number of years. And in fact, we did our very first DGSI disclosure by 2004. So, and that continues to this day. 2014, there was the EU directive on non-financial reporting. So a predecessor, if you will, of CSRD. 2015 here in the UK, the Modern Slavery Act, 2016 to 2020. These are just examples. Hampton-Alexander Report on Women on Boards. So by 2020, wow, we came mainstream. It's really embedded, growing in importance. Enel, the Italian energy company, in 2019 had the first sustainability linked bond. So there were green bonds. I think the first one, 2007, within the EU. But this was the first time that it wasn't linked to the proceeds are going to fund a particular green project. It was wider than that. And if I look at my own company, we're into 2024, so the end of 2020, we began talking with a consortium of banks about our revolving credit facility. This is a $3 billion overdraft that RELX has. We hope, I'm sure there's some wood here, that we never have to use it, but it's really important for our credit rating that we have access to capital if something should go severely wrong. And what we did is we embedded 3 KPIs into that revolving credit facility. If we get it right, great, it's going to reduce the cost. If we don't, it's more expensive to hold that facility. Those 3 KPIs, I'm going to tell you about 2 of them in a minute, but one is on our environmental targets. So I'll talk more about the other 2 in a minute, but where are we going to be by 2030? That is a question. So to look at that a little bit more closely, it's not advancing. Maybe this is our 6th technology failure of the day. That's there's no more battery. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Europe moving forward, but elsewhere. Next week, I am making my 2nd presentation of the year to the RELX board, and I did have as a title to a slide that's very similar that I'm going to present to our board, and it was called Europe Moving Forward, US Moving Backward, and my CEO suggested that I remove that title. So Europe moving forward, but where else? CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Well, this is really interesting, right? Because summer of 2023, by the end of July, we had the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which need to underpin CSRD. We're moving forward. And RELX is in the very first wave of companies due to report. And that's for three reasons. So one of the things we did when we simplified our name is we simplified our listing structure because we had a dual structure where we were, there was a parent entity half owned by a Dutch side of the business and a UK side. So in 2015, we became a sole PLC, but not beyond the reach of CSRD for three reasons. One, the number of people that we employ in Europe. Two, the amount of turnover that we have. But the reason that we're in scope right from the beginning is because we have securities on the EEX in the Netherlands. So we have listed debt on a European exchange. So we're in scope. However, I have a little question mark by 2025 because the Netherlands has not enacted CSRD in law. So what does that mean for all of the work that we have been doing to prepare for this? And this has been a lot of engagement, I'll say, amongst almost all the parts of our business. We set up a senior steering group for CSRD led by my chief financial officer with different heads of handling different parts of the report. And well, we don't know. Neither does EY, who will do our limited assurance, which is where you need to begin with limited assurance. Maybe at some point we're going to move to a reasonable assurance test for this, but not initially. So we may be in the situation where we voluntarily report on CSRD, but if the Dutch enact legislation just before we publish, we might not actually be in full compliance because we wouldn't be mentioning the law under which we are required to report. Anyway, I'm sure there'll be some common sense applied, but and it's not just, of course, the Netherlands. Germany has yet to put it into law as well. France has, but should they be? They may say, why it's not very fair to French companies that they're reporting ahead of all the other ones. But anyway, I'm sure this is kind of growing pains, and it's not going to make CSRD go away. We are going to need to do that and to comply. I guess my piece of advice, and we can talk more about this during the panel, don't panic. Try to resist the fees that some would have you spend. You know your business better than anybody else. We did the gap analysis ourselves. I was really adamant about that. I also didn't think, despite all the excellence of the Big Four, that they should do the stakeholder engagement work. We went with, for our double materiality assessment, we went with a smaller entity that had been working with us on that over a number of years, much more cost effective, much more pragmatic. That worked for us. Corporate sustainability due diligence directive in force next year. Reporting in 2026, I did see that maybe there'll be some impetus for enfolding CS-DDD into CSRD. And I think the more we can bring things together, that makes our lives as reporters a lot easier. EUDR as well coming into force next year. That is on making sure that we are not having paper, in our case, that is from illegal sources, from virgin forests, etc. The U.S. Well, it's been interesting times, hasn't it? We've had a general election or presidential election. And as I've been saying to my colleagues over the last 18 months around the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, who dictate what listed companies need to do to be compliant with their rules, that if, in fact, it was a return to the White House of Mr. Trump, that we would see that stop, and we will. But at the same time, there will be some states that will continue to move forward. So California has always been progressive, and it will continue to be progressive. You can see that earlier this year, there's two corporate data accountability acts that are related, climate related financial risk act. They're both in force from 2026. They kind of come in. If you are already reporting against the task force for climate-related financial disclosure, you should be okay in California, worth checking just to make sure if you are selling into California. But I think it's just a picture of, two countries that we tend to look at a lot, from this vantage point, the United Kingdom and the US, but it's not just them, it's Japan. Japan has introduced mandatory climate reporting this year. They're saying aligned with TCFD. Also, they would like to see further alignment. We live in a world of acronyms. The ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. So in the absence of having EU regulation for Japanese companies, for example, they are interested in what the ISSB is recommending, trying to align further China as well. And I think this is very interesting because if the United States pulls out of the Paris Agreement again, and we see a kind of step back, then China goes forward in terms of its green credentials, its place in terms of battery production and other alternative sources. So I think it'll be quite interesting. But before I mention Australia and South Africa, where the terminology comes into play, I think is quite interesting because about I don't know, a year and a half ago or so, I was quite interested because there was a lot of pushback against our largest investor, which is BlackRock, if you recall, not allowed to invest the Texas retired teachers pension fund for discriminating against Texas fossil fuel companies. So I was interested because that was an initiative of the attorneys generals of a number of US states, so-called red states, although, there's a lot more, perhaps, red pockets across the US. And I was interested to just see, how did attorneys generals more broadly feel about climate regulation. And one thing I think is quite interesting, and if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed by the Biden administration with a big focus on green energy, that there's some states like Texas have done quite well in terms of getting investment for renewables. This is a good thing. And if we change our terminology and we talk about choice for consumers and pricing for consumers, then we can have a less, I think, we can have an easier conversation. So I just keep that in mind as we look at, what life is going to be like over the next few years. Australia as well, mandatory reporting, and South Africa is moving forward as well, setting up a kind of climate board with reporting, having named individuals responsible for reporting back to the government on climate. So I think it will be very interesting to see how this develops. On that note, where might there be pushback? Corporate responsibility related, fill in sustainability, fill in ESG, KPIs as part of executive, should say variable compensation. So some of the proxy advisors who had been saying, yeah, this is maybe a good thing to do, maybe taking a step back. So will the heads of our remuneration committees agree or feel, will they have less? Will they have none? Will we be moving forward? Will we be moving backward? Something to watch. DEI, if you saw in the FT an article about Walmart, dampening down on some of their diversity, equity, and inclusion events and investment. So last year, the Supreme Court overturned the ability for universities to prioritize a stream for admissions for students that may have come from backgrounds that were previously discriminated against. The Supreme Court said no. So, that kind of opened the door a bit. But what about supplier diversity? And maybe some pushback here, because a number of companies like my own have been prioritizing setting some goals around supplier diversity. What will happen with that? Ensuring that we have women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, et cetera. Climate goals will become less ambitious. And what about external advocacy? So advocacy, are we going to be willing to put our heads above the parapet to say the stuff that we actually believe in for fear that it's not going to be as well received as it was previously? But I'm trying to end on a happy note. The fundamentals of corporate responsibility, sustainability, whatever you want to call it, I think still remain. Right? This regulation, so we've talked about that, is still in place in a number of jurisdictions, and I don't see Europe rolling back on that, and I don't see it being rolled back in other places where it is moving forward. We know that we want to attract and retain the best people, so our employees are very interested in this topic, and I think they will continue to be, especially for the younger people that we want to attract into our business, that we want to keep. It's a war for talent, important. Investors, a number of them, I hope, because of course, when our investors talk, the board listens. So the investors shrug their shoulders and say, then it will, take the focus slightly away, but the regulation will help keep the focus as well. But we hope that investors that have felt that there was a strong business case will continue to do so. Our engagement with non-governmental organizations that feed into this kind of license to operate as a business. So I just wanted to give an example, to say, this is what I do. I think is a kind of conscience of the company. I'm always grateful when I have a desk. And while I'm with the company, that's my role, is to be able to point out these things. And that we try and stay the course. The stuff that we have always felt is important before anybody was looking, we voluntarily reported on our environmental picture, on inclusion. We need to still continue to do that and to prioritize where you can have the biggest impact. This is the RELX SDG Resource Center. So those are two of the KPIs that are in this $3 billion revolving credit facility. So not just a nice to do, it has been included, these three KPIs, in the variable compensation of our CEO and our CFO. And the KPIs are how much content do we have on this site, and how many unique users do we have? So we're trying to raise that by 15. So if we're about access to information, the Resource Center is free content to the world that advances knowledge of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I've got an example from one of our businesses. And one of the things that we do each year, we have a virtual SDG Inspiration Day. We did that in June. Our focus was on AI for the Sustainable Development Goals. We talked about stuff that matters to our business, like AI in the rule of law, AI in health. Where do the guardrails need to be on truth and trusted content, AI in the rule of law? We had over 1,100 people join us. All of that content is freely available on the Resource Center. We made a special collection available, and then we did a piece with the content where we've already had nearly 100,000 views. So that's fantastic. So I think it's really important that, we continue, those of us that really believe in the stuff that I'm talking about, that we continue to focus on that. And a final example of something that you can find on the site, AI, of course, could be a whole topic for another day. We have a strong play on artificial intelligence. We've been using it for 20 years. Every time each of us have used a recommendation engine, we've been using AI. Gen AI over the last 18 months has kind of gained in usage and consumer awareness. This is indexing patent data from a business in LexisNexis Legal and Professional to the Sustainable Development Goals. We did this in conjunction with the World Intellectual Property Organization earlier this year to look at where were patents advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, where were they not. At the bottom, you can see gender equality, not much patents there, makes sense perhaps, but quality education sort of down the bottom, maybe there's an opportunity. While at the top, industry, innovation, and infrastructure in terms of the number of patents over that period, 2000 to 2023. So that's in our wheelhouse of our expertise. And again, I'm going to try and make sure that we keep that focus. So I hope that was not too chilling, but I think we have to look at the world as it is, and continue to progress the things that we know are important.